In a world where power is measured by wealth, military might, and influence, there stood a man with none of these, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. No army, no fortune, no throne, and yet, in just over 2 decades, he revolutionized the hearts of billions, shaping the course of history forever. His story is not one of conquest, but of courage, not of domination, but of liberation, not of revenge, but of mercy. Today, we stand at a crossroads. Will we continue to misunderstand him, or will we seek the truth of his message? The choice is ours, but know this, when we finally see him for who he truly was, hearts will not just respect him. They will fall in love with him. The world has praised philosophers, scientists, kings, and warriors. But when it comes to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the narrative shifts. He's not always introduced with honor. Instead, he's often misunderstood, misrepresented, and maligned, especially in modern media and Western discourse. The man who changed the course of human history through peace, patience, and divine guidance is too often painted through the lens of fear, ignorance, or outright lies. He is accused without being studied, judged without being known, and feared by those who have never even read his words. This is the tragedy of our times. The greatest man to walk the earth is hidden behind headlines, buried beneath bias, and overlooked by the very people who need his message the most. But why is that? Because the truth about Muhammad P.B.U.H. is powerful. It breaks chains, it awakens hearts, it confronts injustice, challenges arrogance, and calls for submission, not to a man, but to the creator of the heavens and the earth. And when truth has that kind of strength, it becomes dangerous to those who benefit from lies. He wasn't just a prophet for Muslims. He was a mercy to all creation. He didn't come to divide. He came to call people back to unity under one God. Yet centuries later, his name still causes discomfort, not because of what he did, but because of what he represents, a truth too powerful to ignore and a legacy too alive to erase. He spoke for the voiceless. He stood for justice. He lived in humility. And yet, the world still tries to silence his story. But the truth always finds its way. And when people finally see him for who he really was, hearts don't just respect him. They fall in love with him. Long before the first verse of the Quran was revealed, before he stood on the mountain and received divine command, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was already known by a name that carried weight: Al-Amin, the trustworthy. This title wasn't given by his family, his followers, or his companions. It was given by his people, the same people who would later oppose him, the same society that was buried in tribalism, idol worship, and injustice. Even in that chaos, they trusted him. Why? Because he never lied, he never cheated, he never broke a promise. In a world where deception was common, where betrayal was normal, he stood apart. When people had something valuable, something sacred, something they feared losing, they would leave it with him. That's the level of trust they had in his character. He was honest in trade, gentle in speech, generous in dealings, and kind to everyone, regardless of their status. Even those who didn't agree with his beliefs couldn't deny his integrity. That's what makes his story so powerful. His character was already proof before his message arrived. When the revelation came and he declared himself a prophet, the people didn't question his honesty. They questioned their own hearts, because deep down they knew this was not a man who would invent lies about God. This was not someone who would sell truth for power or fame. Being called Al-Amin was more than a title. It was a testimony, a silent endorsement from a society that knew the truth even before they were ready to accept it. And to this day, his name still echoes with that same purity. A man who was trusted before he spoke and loved by those who knew his heart. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came with the message of Islam, he didn't come to build an empire or seize control of land. He didn't carry a sword in one hand and a crown in the other. He came with a message that freed hearts from slavery to idols, to wealth, to ego, to power, and to false gods. His mission was never about domination. It was about liberation. He walked into a world where the strong crushed the weak, where women were treated like property and the poor were forgotten, and he flipped the system from the inside out, not with brutality, but with truth. He taught that every soul mattered, that no Arab was superior to a non-Arab, that a slave and a king stood equal before the Creator, that righteousness, not race, tribe, or title, was the measure of a human being. Long before the first verse of the Quran was revealed, before he stood on the mountain and received divine command, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was already known by a name that carried weight, Al-Amin, the trustworthy. This title wasn't given by his family, his followers, or his companions. It was given by his people, the same people who would later oppose him, the same society that was buried in tribalism, idol worship, and injustice. Even in that chaos, they trusted him. Why? Because he never lied, he never cheated, he never broke a promise. In a world where deception was common, where betrayal was normal, he stood apart. When people had something valuable, something sacred, something they feared losing, they would leave it with him. That's the level of trust they had in his character. He was honest in trade, gentle in speech, generous in dealings, and kind to everyone, regardless of their status. Even those who didn't agree with his beliefs couldn't deny his integrity. That's what makes his story so powerful. His character was already proof before his message arrived. When the revelation came, and he declared himself a prophet, the people didn't question his honesty. They questioned their own hearts, because deep down they knew this was not a man who would invent lies about God. This was not someone who would sell truth for power or fame. Being called Al-Amin was more than a title. It was a testimony, a silent endorsement from a society that knew the truth even before they were ready to accept it. And to this day, his name still echoes with that same purity, a man who was trusted before he spoke, and loved by those who knew his heart. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came with the message of Islam, he didn't come to build an empire or seize control of land. He didn't carry a sword in one hand and a crown in the other. He came with a message that freed hearts from slavery to idols, to wealth, to ego, to power, and to false gods. His mission was never about domination. It was about liberation. He walked into a world where the strong crushed the weak, where women were treated like property and the poor were forgotten. And he flipped the system from the inside out, not with brutality, but with truth. He taught that every soul mattered, that no Arab was superior to a non-Arab, that a slave and a king stood equal before the Creator, that righteousness, not race, tribe, or title, was the measure of a human being. His goal was not to conquer cities. It was to conquer the darkness inside people, the hate, the pride, the injustice. He didn't force Islam on anyone. He simply presented the truth and lived it so beautifully that hearts followed. Even when he had power, he used it to protect, to uplift, to unite, not to control. When he entered Mecca in victory after years of persecution, he didn't seek revenge. He didn't build a palace. He forgave. He freed those who had once tried to kill him. That's not domination. That's divine leadership. Prophet Muhammad but didn't enslave minds. He awakened them. He didn't force submission to himself. He called people to submit to the one who created them. That's not the legacy of a warlord. That's the legacy of a liberator. And the more you study him, the more you realize he didn't come to rule over bodies. He came to set souls free. There's a rare kind of strength that forces even your enemies to respect you. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had that strength, not through power or wealth, but through character. The same men who plotted to kill him, who slandered his name and attacked his mission, would still send their valuables to his home for safekeeping. Why? Because even when they hated his message, they couldn't deny his trustworthiness. Abu Jahl, one of his fiercest enemies, never called him a liar. He rejected the message, yes, but he admitted that Muhammad had never spoken a false word. He didn't disbelieve because of doubt. He disbelieved out of arrogance, and deep down he knew, this man is truthful, this man is sincere. Many of the leaders of Quraysh would gather secretly, listening to the Prophet recite the Quran at night. They would hide their admiration from each other out of pride, but they were drawn to him. They couldn't explain it, but the truth touched something in them. That's the mark of a real leader, when even those who oppose you feel your presence deep in their conscience. And it wasn't just in Mecca. Throughout his life, even hostile tribes and foreign leaders treated him with respect. They saw in him a rare combination of wisdom, mercy, and strength. He didn't curse his enemies. He prayed for them. He didn't destroy those who wronged him. He forgave them when they were at their weakest. True greatness doesn't need approval. It doesn't need applause, and the prophet's life proves that. Even when people hated what he stood for, they couldn't stop themselves from respecting who he was. Because truth doesn't need permission to shine. It just needs someone brave enough to live it. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, began his mission, he entered a society where women were silenced, shamed, and treated as disposable. Daughters were buried alive, wives had no rights, mothers were neglected. A woman's worth was measured only through the men in her life. But from the moment the Quran was revealed, everything began to change. The prophet didn't just protect women, he elevated them. He reminded the world that a woman's value was not in her beauty, her voice, or her ability to bear children. It was in her faith, her character, and her dignity. He taught that a daughter is not a burden, but a source of mercy. That honoring one's mother is among the highest forms of worship. That educating a woman is an act of reward. And that the best of men are those who treat their wives with kindness. He gave women the right to own property, inherit wealth, seek knowledge, and participate in society, all at a time when the world treated them like shadows. He wept when his daughter Fatima entered a room. He stood for her, kissed her forehead, and sat her beside him. In a world where fathers disowned daughters, he loved her openly. He taught that paradise lies beneath the feet of the mother, not the warrior, not the merchant, not the king, but the mother. That one lesson alone flipped centuries of oppression on its head. The prophet didn't wait for society to evolve. He raised its standard, and he didn't speak for women to gain applause. He did it because Allah commanded justice. His treatment of women was not reactive, it was revolutionary. And over 400 years later, his example still remains unmatched because it came from divine light, not worldly trend. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not the founder of a new religion. He never claimed originality. He didn't come to erase what came before him. He came to complete it. He was the seal of the prophets, the final messenger in a long and sacred chain that began with Adam and continued through Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, peace be upon them all. His message wasn't a contradiction, it was a confirmation. He taught what every prophet before him had taught. There is no God but Allah. Worship him alone. Live with justice, walk with humility, treat others with mercy. Prepare for the hereafter. These were not new commandments. They were timeless truths. In fact, one of the most beautiful aspects of his mission was his respect for those who came before him. He spoke of Jesus not as an enemy, but as a brother in prophethood. He called Moses a great messenger. He honored Mary, the mother of Jesus, as one of the greatest women to ever live. His message wasn't one of division. It was one of unity, reminding mankind that all true prophets came from the same source, carrying the same torch of guidance. What made him different wasn't a new ideology. It was the final revelation. The Quran came not to start something, but to preserve the message once and for all. The prophet's life was the living commentary of that revelation. His mission was to deliver it, live it, and leave it intact for generations to come. He didn't rewrite the truth, he restored it. He didn't break the chain, he completed it. And in doing so, he didn't just guide his own people. He became a mercy to the entire world, carrying a message that was global, eternal, and divinely sealed. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, wasn't just a messenger who delivered the words of the Quran. He lived them. His actions, his speech, his silence, and even the way he dealt with enemies reflected the very essence of what would later be compiled into the book. Before the ink dried on parchment, the message was already alive in him. He was the walking Quran. When Aisha, the prophet's wife, was asked about his character, she said his character was the Quran. That statement says everything. If you wanted to know what patience looked like, you watched him. If you wanted to understand mercy, justice, gratitude, or trust in God, you looked at him. He didn't just preach with words, he embodied the message in every breath. When the verses on forgiveness were revealed, he forgave. When verses on charity were revealed, he gave until he had nothing left. When the verses about justice and honesty came, he stood firm, even if it meant standing against his own people. He never used revelation for personal gain. He submitted to it before asking others to do the same. In a time when books were rare and literacy was scarce, people didn't learn Islam by reading. They learned it by watching him. The way he smiled, the way he sat with the poor, the way he prayed deep into the night. All of it was part of the revelation. He didn't wait to be celebrated. He waited for Allah's approval. He showed the world that Islam wasn't just a religion to be studied. It was a way of life to be lived. And through his example, the Quran became more than just a recited book. It became a human experience shaped by the most perfect model the world has ever known. One of the greatest tests of character is not how you act when you're weak, but how you respond when you finally have the power to strike back. Most people, when they rise, remember the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, and they seek revenge. But Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught the world something different. He taught that true strength lies in forgiveness, especially when it's in your grasp to destroy. After more than 20 years of persecution, mockery, and brutal attacks from the people of Mecca, the Prophet returned, not as a fugitive, but as a conqueror. He walked into the city with an army. He had the authority to imprison, to punish, even to execute those who had tortured his followers and driven him out. The world would have expected revenge, but what they witnessed instead was mercy on a scale history had never seen. He gathered his former enemies, the same men who plotted his death, and asked them a question: "What do you think I will do with you today?" Trembling, they answered, "You are a noble brother, the son of a noble brother." And with calm dignity he replied, "Go, you are free." That moment wasn't weakness. It was divine strength, the kind of strength that silences hatred and melts arrogance. He forgave not because they deserved it, but because his heart was guided by something greater than revenge, the mercy of Allah. This act of forgiveness didn't just heal old wounds. It transformed enemies into believers. It showed that Islam wasn't about revenge or domination. It was about reforming hearts, restoring dignity, and proving that love for the sake of Allah is more powerful than any sword. That's who he was, a man who never let pain turn into bitterness, a prophet who forgave when it mattered most. When we think of world leaders, revolutionaries, and empire builders, we often picture men backed by armies, wealth, or political alliances. But Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had none of these when he began his mission. No fortune, no military, no kingdom, just one man in a desert with a message from above. And yet, he transformed the world more profoundly than any king or general in history. He didn't bribe people to follow him. He didn't conquer lands with force to make people believe. He won hearts with truth, character, and unshakable faith. The Quraysh offered him power, riches, and leadership. He turned it all down. He wasn't interested in the world. He was focused on the next. In just 23 years, he raised a generation that went from idol worship to unshakable monotheism, from tribal bloodshed to universal brotherhood, from ignorance to knowledge. He didn't do it with propaganda or manipulation. He did it with sincerity, consistency, and trust in Allah. The empires of Rome and Persia towered over Arabia in his time, rich, powerful, seemingly unstoppable. But it was his message, born in a cave and lived through hardship, that outlasted them all. No castles, no treasures, just the truth, planted in hearts and watered with love, prayer, and patience. To this day, over 1 billion people follow his example, not because he ruled over them, but because he reached them. His legacy didn't come from thrones. It came from sujud. And his revolution wasn't built on the backs of armies. It was built on the backs of the sincere, the poor, the oppressed, and the believers. That's the miracle. That's the power of a man connected to the divine. He didn't need the world to change it. He only needed the truth. As we reflect on the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we witness the extraordinary power of truth, compassion, and integrity. His message wasn't about power or fame. It was about freeing hearts and uniting humanity under the one true Creator. His life stands as a beacon of mercy, justice, and humility. May we strive to embody the same values in our own lives, seeking truth, serving others, and loving with sincerity. Thank you for taking the time to listen. May Allah bless you on your journey, and may peace and guidance always accompany you. Good luck in all that you do,